I always thought I was the strong one. The one who didn't need to ask twice, didn't need to be reminded, didn't need a hand held. I was the daughter who showed up to every holiday, every birthday, every last-minute crisis that needed someone level-headed to fix it. I answered the phone at 2 in the morning. I drove 3 hours in a snowstorm when my mother had a scare with her heart. I canceled plans, rearranged my schedule, said of course when I wanted to say I can't. So when the doctor told me I had a tumor on my left ovary and that the surgery needed to happen soon, not emergency room soon, but within the next 6 weeks soon, I genuinely believed my family would show up for me the same way I had always shown up for them. I was wrong. I need to tell you this story from the beginning, because if I start in the middle, you might think I'm being dramatic. You might think I'm exaggerating the way people do when they're hurt, but I'm not. Every part of this happened exactly the way I'm about to describe it. My name is Amani. I'm 31 years old. I work as a dental hygienist in Columbus, Ohio. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment that I've spent 2 years making feel like home. Plants on the windowsill, photos on the fridge, a little reading chair by the window that my uncle helped me carry up 3 flights of stairs. I'm not somebody who has a dramatic life. I'm not somebody who chases chaos. I go to work, I call my mother on Sundays, I visit my grandmother every other Saturday. That has always been my life. My mother has 3 kids, I'm the middle one. My older brother Kendrick is 34 and lives about 40 minutes from my parents in a suburb outside Columbus. He works in finance, owns a beautiful house, has a fiancée named Brittany, who my mother adores. My younger sister Tessa is 27, still lives at home, still figuring things out. My parents have always been open about the fact that Tessa needs more support. What they never said out loud, but what I understood from a very young age, was that Kendrick was the one they were proud of. Kendrick was the achievement. Tessa was the one who needed protecting. And I was somewhere in the middle, capable enough to be forgotten. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I'm just telling you the landscape. I found out about the tumor in early March. A routine checkup, an ultrasound my OBGYN ordered almost as an afterthought, and then a phone call 3 days later asking me to come back in. I remember sitting in that exam room alone, in that paper gown that does absolutely nothing to make you feel like a person, while my doctor explained what they had found. She said it was likely benign. She said that word, likely, with a kind of measured calm that I recognized as deliberate. Likely benign means they don't know yet. It means we have to go in and look. She gave me a surgery date, April 17th. I called my mother from the parking lot of the medical building. I was still in my coat, keys in my hand, sitting in the car because my legs didn't want to carry me any further just then. Mom, I said, I need to tell you something. She listened, she said the right things. She said she was sorry. She said she loved me. She said we'd get through it. She told me she'd tell my dad. And then she said, almost as a footnote, you know April is the Hawaii trip, right? I did know. My parents had been planning it for over a year, their 35th wedding anniversary trip. 10 days in Maui with Kendrick and Brittany and my Aunt Rochelle and her husband. It had been booked, paid for, celebrated over family dinners. My mother had shown me photos of the hotel. I had helped her pick out luggage. My surgery is on the 17th, I said. The trip is the 19th. There was a pause. So you'd be 2 days out of surgery when they left, she said. Yes, another pause. Well, let's see what the doctor says. Maybe you could reschedule. I didn't say anything to that. I just said okay. We said goodbye. I want to be fair here. I want to be honest. I did ask my doctor if the date could be moved. She said the hospital's surgical calendar was already tight, that my case wasn't emergent, but also wasn't something to sit on indefinitely, and that April 17th was the window that worked with the specialist who would assist in the procedure. She said we could push to late May, but that she didn't recommend waiting that long. She explained why. I won't go into all of it, but what she said made it clear to me that April 17th was the right choice medically. I chose it. I told my family. I told them the doctor's reasoning. I told them I understood it was bad timing, but that this was what made sense. What happened next is the part that still takes my breath away a little, even now. Nobody offered to stay. Not my mother, not my father, not Kendrick. They all listened to what I said, and then the conversation moved on to logistics. Whether the hotel would refund one room, whether it was fair to ask the whole group to cancel, whether Tessa could stay with me for a few days. Tessa, who can barely manage her own grocery shopping. Tessa, who I have driven to the emergency room twice in the last year for panic attacks. Tessa was going to be my person. My mother called me the next day and said they had talked it over. She said it wouldn't be fair to Kendrick and Brittany after they had planned so much around this trip. She said my dad had already taken off work. that Aunt Rochelle had bought new snorkeling gear. She said I was going to be fine, that the doctor said it was likely benign, that Tessa would be there, and that they would video call every day. I sat on my kitchen floor after that phone call. I don't know why the floor. I just couldn't make it to the couch. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself that people had surgery alone all the time, that this was an outpatient procedure, that I was being too sensitive. I said all the things to myself that I knew they were probably saying about me. And for about 48 hours, I almost convinced myself. Then I told my uncle. My father's older brother, Uncle Royce, is 68 years old. He retired 3 years ago from the post office after 32 years of service. He drives a 10-year-old Buick that he keeps immaculate. He calls me on my birthday and always picks up on the second ring. He has never, not once in my life, made me feel like an inconvenience. He came over that evening. I hadn't asked him to. I'd just called to talk. But he showed up at my door 40 minutes later with a container of soup from the Caribbean place I love and a 6-pack of ginger ale, because he remembered that ginger ale was what my grandmother always gave us when we were sick. He sat at my kitchen table and he listened to everything. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't defend my parents. He just listened. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll be there. I'll take you in and I'll be there when you wake up." I started crying. I didn't mean to. I said, "You don't have to do that." He said, "I know I don't have to." That was it. That was the whole conversation. The weeks between that night and the surgery were some of the hardest I've had. Not because of the tumor. I had genuinely made peace with the medical side of it, had done my research, had asked my doctor every question I could think of. The hard part was watching my family prepare for Hawaii while I prepared for surgery. My mother texted me packing lists. She sent me a photo of the swimsuit she'd ordered. One evening, she called to ask if I thought the hotel restaurant would have vegetarian options for Brittany. I said I didn't know. She said, "Oh, by the way, how are you feeling? Nervous?" "A little," I said. "You're going to be fine," she said. "The doctor said it's probably nothing." And then she went back to talking about the restaurant. I didn't say anything. I had learned by that point that saying something only made me feel worse. Because what I wanted wasn't an argument. What I wanted was for someone to look at me and see that I was scared. That's all. I wanted to be seen. Uncle Royce saw me. He came to every pre-op appointment. He sat in the waiting room with a book while I went in for blood work, for consultations, for the pre-surgical screening. He didn't make a big deal of it. He just showed up, the way you show up for someone you love. On the drive home from the last appointment before surgery, he mentioned almost casually that he'd been writing some things down. I asked what he meant. He said, "Just keeping track, don't worry about it." I didn't push. I was exhausted and anxious and grateful, and I didn't have the bandwidth to ask more questions. The morning of April 17th, Uncle Royce was at my apartment at 5:30 a.m. He had coffee in a travel mug. Mine, not his, because he remembered I didn't like the paper cups from the gas station. He drove me to the hospital. He walked me to the registration desk. When they took me back to prep, he sat down in the waiting area with his book and his phone, and he stayed there. He did not go home to sleep. He did not leave for breakfast. He stayed. My family landed in Maui that afternoon. I know this because my mother sent a group text with a picture of the ocean from their hotel balcony. The caption said, "We made it. Miss you all." I was in post-op recovery when my phone showed the notification. One of the nurses had set my phone on the tray next to me. I looked at that picture, the blue water, the bright sky, my mother's caption, and I felt something that I still have difficulty naming. It wasn't quite anger. It wasn't quite sadness. It was something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. Uncle Royce was there when they brought me to my recovery room. He was sitting in the chair by the window, still with his book. When I opened my eyes, he said, "Everything went perfectly. Doctor already spoke to me. You're okay." I believed him immediately. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Calm and certain, the way you can only be when you've been waiting and watching, and didn't allow yourself to think otherwise. I was discharged the next morning. He took me home. He'd stopped at the pharmacy already. My prescriptions were in a bag on my kitchen counter when I walked in. He'd also stocked my refrigerator with things I could eat: soup, applesauce, crackers, a rotisserie chicken already pulled apart and stored in a container. I stood in my kitchen and looked at all of it and didn't know what to say. He said, "Rest, I'll be back tomorrow." He came every day for the first week. He drove me to my follow-up appointment on day 3. He sat with me when I was nauseous from the pain medication and couldn't sleep. He watched old movies with me on the couch and didn't try to talk when I didn't feel like talking. On day 5, I managed to walk around the block slowly, hold his arm, and he didn't make a single comment about how slow we were going. My family called. I'll say that, because it's true. My mother called most evenings. My dad called twice. Kendrick texted a few times. Short messages, checking in, asking how I was feeling. My Aunt Rochelle, who is not technically my aunt but my mother's college roommate, who has always gone by the title, sent a voice note saying she was thinking of me. But here's what nobody asked. What does your apartment look like right now? Do you have food? Have you been able to shower? Are you sleeping? Is the pain manageable? Is Uncle Roy still coming by? Do you need anything? Is there anything we can do from here? Nobody asked any of that. Instead, my mother told me about the sunrise they had watched from the beach. My father mentioned a luau they'd attended. Kendrick sent me a photo of Brittany paddleboarding, saying she'd been nervous to try it and had done great. I responded to all of it. I said beautiful and so fun, and she's braver than me. I performed wellness because it was easier than the alternative. By the end of the first week, I had stopped expecting anything. That sounds bleak, but actually it was freeing in a strange way. When you stop expecting something, the disappointment can't find you. They came home on April 29th. My mother called that night, from the car on the way back from the airport. She sounded tired and happy, the way you sound at the end of a good trip, a little reluctant to be back, a little grateful for your own bed. She said it had been wonderful. She said Maui was everything she'd hoped for. She said Kendrick had surprised her, and my dad with a sunset dinner on the third night, at a restaurant right on the water, and that it had been one of the most beautiful evenings of her life. I said I was glad. She asked how I was feeling. I said better, mostly. She said good, and then she said she was exhausted from the travel and needed to sleep, and we said good night. She did not ask what the follow-up appointment had said. She did not ask if I was back to work yet. I wasn't. I was out another 2 weeks. She did not ask about pain levels, or whether I was eating, or whether I was scared about the pathology results that were still pending. I lay awake that night for a long time. It was Tessa, of all people, who made it worse without meaning to. She came over a few days after they got back. My parents had dropped her off on their way to a dinner, and she sat on my couch and told me, enthusiastically, in detail, about every single thing they'd done in Hawaii, complete with her phone turned toward me so I could scroll through hundreds of photos. She meant well. She genuinely meant well. But at some point she said, in a perfectly innocent voice, "Mom said you were totally fine, so we didn't feel too guilty." I didn't respond. She said, "Were you fine?" I looked at her for a moment. I said, "Not really." She looked uncomfortable and then she changed the subject and I let her. Uncle Royce heard about that conversation a few days later. He didn't say much. He just got quiet in a way that I recognized. It was the same quietness he'd had back in March, when I'd first told him what was happening. The kind of quiet that means someone is paying attention. He had been paying attention, it turned out, since the very beginning. I didn't know yet how much. My parents' 40th anniversary was coming up that summer. Not their actual 40th, but a belated celebration they'd been planning, combined with a family reunion on my father's side. It was scheduled for the last Saturday in July, at a rented event space about 20 minutes from their house. My aunts and cousins from out of state were coming. My grandmother, my father's mother, who is 83 and sharp as a tack, was flying in from Atlanta. There would be catered food and a slideshow and toasts. My mother had been planning it since the fall. I helped plan it too. I designed the program. I sourced the flowers. I coordinated the photographer. I did it all from my recovery, some of it from the couch with my laptop, because that is the kind of daughter I am. Uncle Royce never asked me to stop helping. He never told me not to. He just kept doing what he was doing, which, I was starting to understand, included keeping a very meticulous record. The week before the party, he came over for dinner, and he showed me. He had a folder on his phone, screenshots mostly, texts my mother had sent during the trip. My mother's voice notes to the family group chat while I was in surgery, talking about what they'd ordered at the luau. Texts I'd sent to my mother during the recovery that she hadn't responded to for 2 or 3 days. A message I'd sent asking if she could help me figure out whether my short-term disability claim had been filed correctly. She'd replied 4 days later with a brief response that didn't answer the question. He had organized them by date. He had added notes to himself in a separate document that I hadn't known about. Observations, things he'd seen, things I'd mentioned without realizing he'd written down. I looked at all of it and I felt sick. Not because of what he'd done. I trusted him completely and I knew his intentions were good. I felt sick, because seeing it laid out like that made it undeniable in a way that my own feelings never quite had. I could second-guess my feelings. I could tell myself I was too sensitive. I could not second-guess screenshots. "What are you going to do with this?" I asked. He said, "Whatever you want me to do with it." I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the parking lot outside my doctor's office, sitting in my car in my coat. I thought about my kitchen floor after my mother's phone call. I thought about waking up in the recovery room to a photo of the ocean. I thought about Tessa saying Mom said you were totally fine, so we didn't feel too guilty. I told him to use it however he thought was right. The party was beautiful. My mother was radiant in a deep burgundy dress. My father looked happier and more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. The food was good. The flowers looked exactly like the photos I'd sent the vendor. The photographer was professional and unobtrusive. My grandmother had arrived the day before, and she looked wonderful. She had on a cream-colored pantsuit, and she smelled like the same perfume she has always worn. The one that I associated since childhood with being held and feeling safe. I sat at my assigned table with some cousins I don't see often, and I ate my food and I smiled and I said all the right things. I was fine. I was genuinely okay, in the way that you can be okay at a party when your body has recovered even if other things haven't. The toasts began after dessert. My dad's brother spoke first. That's Uncle Royce's younger brother, who lives in Cincinnati. Then one of my mother's college friends. Then Kendrick, who gave a genuinely warm and funny speech that made my mother cry a little. Then Uncle Royce stood up. I don't know if the room sensed something. Maybe people just quieted down out of respect for him. He is the kind of man people naturally grow quiet for. He is not loud, he is not flashy, he doesn't need a room to pay attention to him. But when he stood up they did. He thanked everyone for coming. He said he was grateful to be part of this family for so many decades. He said my father was one of the best men he had ever known. And he meant it, I could tell, and my father's face showed that he heard it. And then he said, I want to talk about one of the things a family is actually for. He paused. He looked around the room, not dramatically, just steadily. He said, this past April, one of our family members needed surgery. She was scared. She had been told there might be something serious and she had 6 weeks to wait and find out. He didn't say my name, but every person in that room knew who he meant. I felt my face go completely still. She reached out to her family. She told them the timing. She explained what the doctor said. She was honest about what she needed. And her family. He paused again. Her family went on vacation. The room had gone very quiet. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform. He spoke in the same even tone he had used when he told me everything went perfectly. You're okay, he said. I am not saying this to embarrass anyone. I am saying it because I love this family, and I believe that what we do in the quiet moments, the moments with no audience, no cameras, no reason to perform, that is who we actually are. Then he took out his phone. He read, quietly and clearly, the text messages. The dates and times. My text to my mother that had gone unanswered for days. My question about the disability claim. A voicemail he had saved of my mother, from while they were in Hawaii, in which she told him, when he called to update her after my surgery, that she was really glad it all worked out, and that she had faith it would be fine. He read a note he had written to himself. On the night he first came over with soup and ginger ale, that simply said, she needed them and they chose not to be there. This should not be forgotten. My mother's face had gone pale. My father sat very still. Kendrick was looking at the table. My grandmother, who was seated 2 tables away from me, reached over and found my hand. She held it without looking at me. She just held it. When Uncle Royce finished, he said, I stayed because she is my family. Not because it was convenient, not because the timing was good. Because she is family and she was scared and I love her. He looked at me then, directly. And she deserved better. He sat down. For a long moment nobody spoke. My mother was the first to say something. She said his name, just his name, sharply, the way you say someone's name when you don't know what else to say. My father said, Royce, this is not the place. One of my aunts said quietly, actually maybe it is. That created a ripple. People started talking, not loudly, not in chaos, but the way a room talks when something true has just been said and everyone is processing it at the same time. My cousin leaned over to me and whispered, are you okay? I said yes. I think I meant it. My mother came to find me eventually in the space near the coat rack while people were milling around after. Her eyes were red. She said, I didn't know you felt this way. I looked at her. I said, I told you I was scared. She said, I know. I thought you'd be fine. I said quietly, I was. Because Uncle Royce made sure of it, not because of anything we did together. She didn't answer that. She pulled me into a hug. And I let her, because she is my mother and I love her, and none of this erases that. But I didn't say it was okay. Hey, I didn't say, don't worry about it the way I had always said it before. I just hugged her back and let the silence say the thing I had spent years not saying. The months after that party were not easy exactly, but they were honest. My mother called more. She asked better questions, real questions, not the kind that are just formality before the next topic. My father came to Columbus one Saturday in September and took me to lunch, just the two of us, which he had not done since I was maybe 12 years old. He didn't make a speech. He didn't have a formal apology prepared. He just showed up and he looked at me, and he said, "Your uncle was right." That was enough. Kendrick and I are still figuring each other out. We were never particularly close, and I don't think one party is going to remake 30 years of family architecture. But he texted me on my birthday in October. Not just a quick message, but a real one. 3 paragraphs. He said he'd been thinking. He said he was sorry. He said he wanted to be better at this. I wrote back and I told him I did too. My pathology results, which I had actually received weeks before the party, had come back benign. I hadn't told most of them. Not because I wanted to keep them in suspense, but because by the time the results came in, I had understood something. The results were not the point. They had never been the point. The point was not whether the tumor was dangerous. The point was what they'd shown me about where I stood when it mattered. I know some people will hear this story and think that I should have been clearer, that I should have demanded more, that I put myself in this position by always being the capable one who doesn't ask for help. Maybe that's partly true. But I also think about the fact that I did ask. I told my mother I was afraid. I said those words. And the thing is, you should only have to say it once. Uncle Royce never made me say it at all. He just showed up with soup and ginger ale and a 10-year-old Buick and 32 years worth of knowing what it means to do your job quietly and without recognition. And he made sure I was not alone. I think about that a lot. I think about what it means to be the kind of person who notices when someone needs you. Not when it's announced, not when it's convenient, but in the specific texture of their voice when they call to talk and aren't sure how to say what they mean. That is not a skill. It's a choice, made over and over again, every day. I am still the responsible one. I still answer the phone at odd hours. I still show up. But I've started doing something I never used to do. I've started keeping a small running list for myself of the people who have shown up for me. Not to keep score. Just to remember. Uncle Royce is at the top of that list in every version of it I will ever write. And these days, when I sit in my reading chair by the window, the one he helped carry up 3 flights of stairs, I look at it a little differently. It's not just a chair. It's evidence that someone loved me in the way love is supposed to work. Not with grand gestures or perfect words, but with presence. Steady, unhurried, uncomplicated presence. That, I have learned, is the rarest thing in the world.